Today is May 9th, 2026. Exactly 1 month ago, Pakistan's Prime Minister posted on X that both the United States and Iran had agreed to stop fighting. He used the word remarkable. He used the phrase cause of peace. He said both sides had displayed wisdom. That was 1 month ago. Here is what today looks like. The United States fired on and disabled 2 Iranian oil tankers this morning. Iran attacked 3 American Navy destroyers overnight in the Strait of Hormuz. American jets struck Iranian military facilities on Qeshm Island. Iran launched ballistic missiles and drones at the United Arab Emirates again, and residents in Dubai heard the intercept explosions above their city again. Iran seized another oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman, a vessel called the Ocean Koi, and released combat footage of its commandos boarding the ship at gunpoint. The UAE said 3 people were wounded. There is an oil slick covering 95 square kilometers near Karg Island, Iran's main crude export terminal, and the Pentagon has not officially explained what caused it. And Trump called all of this a love tap. He said the ceasefire is going. He said it is in effect. And Iran's foreign ministry said the ceasefire is still in effect too. So both sides fired. Both sides said nothing broke. And Brent crude is holding above $100 a barrel, which means the market is not entirely convinced that nothing broke. I want to explain what a 1-month-old ceasefire that both sides are simultaneously shooting through actually is, because it is not what the word ceasefire normally means. And the gap between what it is called and what it actually is contains the most important strategic fact of this war. That fact has China at its center. Not in any press briefing, in the structure. In the specific reason the ceasefire has lasted 1 month while both sides keep firing. And in the specific reason that China has spent this entire month saying things that technically support everyone while committing to nothing specific that costs China anything at all. Start with what the ceasefire actually produced in 1 month, because the scoreboard matters before the analysis. The ceasefire was brokered by Pakistan on April 8th. It was originally a 2-week arrangement. It has since been extended without a clear deadline. In the 1 month since it was announced, Iran has attacked vessels in the Strait of Hormuz on multiple confirmed occasions. The United States has fired on, seized, and disabled Iranian ships. Iran has struck the UAE with ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones. The UAE has intercepted, according to its own defense ministry, 549 ballistic missiles, 29 cruise missiles, and more than 2,200 drones since February 28th. More than 150 commercial ships are currently anchored outside the strait, unable to move. At least 10 sailors have died in the waterway. The International Energy Agency has described this as the biggest energy crisis in history. American gasoline prices have risen 50% since the war began. The Islamabad talks between Vance and Iran's delegation were held. They failed to produce a deal. Iran's chief negotiator stepped back from his role after the Revolutionary Guard blocked a proposal he supported. Iran has now created a formal government agency called the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, which is currently emailing shipping companies an application form they must fill out to request permission to transit the strait, along with instructions to pay toll fees. Secretary of State Rubio said this week that it is unacceptable for Iran to have a government agency that vets and taxes ships seeking passage through an international waterway. He asked, "Is the world going to accept that Iran now controls an international waterway?" He did not provide an answer to his own question. All of that happened inside a ceasefire that both governments insist is still in effect. This is not a ceasefire in the conventional sense. This is something else. I want to give it a name because naming it precisely is the only way to understand what comes next. I call it a managed confrontation. A managed confrontation is not peace and it is not war. It is the space in between where both sides have calculated that the cost of formally ending the ceasefire is higher than the cost of continuing to fight inside it. America does not want to formally resume bombing because resuming bombing ends the diplomatic window that might still produce a deal. Iran does not want to formally end the ceasefire because formally ending it invites the kind of escalation that the ceasefire is currently limiting. So both sides keep firing, and both sides keep calling it a ceasefire because both sides need the word to remain true, even when the reality underneath it does not match. The managed confrontation is made possible by one structural fact. Iran has not collapsed. After 1 month of a naval blockade on its ports, after 70 days of war that began with American and Israeli strikes on February 28th, after its supreme leader was killed on the first day of the conflict, after its nuclear facilities were struck, after its air defenses were degraded, after its central bank privately warned the president that economic recovery could take 12 years. Iran's military is still firing at American destroyers. Its commandos are still boarding ships. Its new government authority is still emailing application forms to shipping companies. The reason Iran has not collapsed is China, not as a diplomatic statement, as a cash flow. Before this war, Iran was exporting approximately 1.68 million barrels of oil per day. Iran's customs records and tanker tracking data show that Iran's oil has continued moving throughout this conflict, through a system that China spent years building specifically to be unreachable by American enforcement. Transponder off tankers, conducting ship-to-ship transfers in Malaysian waters. Iranian crude, relabeled and delivered to Chinese refineries, called teapots, that process sanctioned oil without documentation. UN payments routed through second-tier Chinese banks outside the SWIFT network. China's official customs records show zero imports from Iran. China's recorded imports of so-called Malaysian crude run to 1.3 million barrels per day, which is more than double Malaysia's entire national oil production. The math does not work unless the oil is Iranian. It is Iranian. This is the system that paid for the drones that hit Dubai this morning. That is not a rhetorical connection. That is a financial one. Now here is the specific thing China did this week that most coverage is not reading precisely enough. On May 6th, Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi flew to Beijing. This was his first visit to China since the war began on February 28th. He sat across from Wang Yi in a formal meeting. Wang Yi said a comprehensive ceasefire is urgently needed. He said the Strait of Hormuz should be reopened as soon as possible. He said the international community shares a common concern for the restoration of normal and safe passage of the strait. He called for Iran and the United States to reopen the waterway within 30 days of any agreement. He said the conflict has already lasted more than 2 months. The Chinese Foreign Ministry published all of that. Those are real statements. Wang Yi said them. But here is what was absent from the Iranian Foreign Ministry's statement after the same meeting. The Iranian statement posted on Telegram did not include China's call for a prompt resumption of shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. China said it, Iran's readout omitted it. Two statements from the same room. The word that matters most in the Chinese statement did not appear in the Iranian version of events. That asymmetry is not a translation error. It is the gap between what China says publicly for American consumption and what China is actually communicating to Tehran. Wang Yi called American and Israeli military actions against Iran illegitimate in that same meeting, according to Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency. That line appeared in Iran's version, but was absent from the main Chinese Foreign Ministry statement. Each government published the parts of the meeting that served its own positioning. China got to say it pressed Iran on Hormuz. Iran got to say China called the war illegitimate. And the specific commitments that would have cost either side something, those were not in either version. I want to explain what China is doing here because it requires a framework to see clearly. I call it the double readout strategy. When China meets with a country that is in direct confrontation with the United States, the double readout strategy means China produces language in each statement that the opposite audience needs to hear. The American-facing statement emphasizes China's calls for Hormuz to reopen. The Iranian-facing statement emphasizes China's condemnation of American military actions. Both audiences read what they came to find. Neither audience reads what they did not want to see. And China collects the diplomatic credit from both sides simultaneously, without paying the cost of actually forcing either side to change its behavior. The double readout strategy has been operating throughout this entire war. Wang Yi has spoken with Araghchi at least 3 times by phone since February 28th. Every one of those calls produced a readout. Every readout said China was deeply concerned. Every readout called for a ceasefire. None of those calls produced a visible change in Iran's behavior at Hormuz. Iran created the Persian Gulf Strait Authority on May 5th, the day before Araghchi flew to Beijing to meet Wang Yi. Iran formalized its toll collection system and its ship vetting authority on the day before it sent its top diplomat to China. If China's concern was going to change Iran's behavior at Hormuz, Iran would not have institutionalized its control over Hormuz 24 hours before the meeting with China, where control over Hormuz was the central topic. Araghchi's visit to Beijing was also timed precisely with respect to one other date. Trump is scheduled to meet Xi in Beijing on May 14th and 15th. That summit is 7 days away. Araghchi arrived in Beijing 8 days before that summit. The sequence is deliberate. Iran sent its foreign minister to China to align positions before Trump arrives to pressure China about Iran. China heard Iran's terms before Trump gets to Beijing. The first listener advantage, which I have described before in a different context, is operating here again. China knows what Iran told it in a room in Beijing this week. Trump will arrive with his own demands. China will have already calibrated its response to Trump's Iran demands around what Iran privately communicated during Araghchi's visit. That is not conspiracy. That is the plain logic of the sequence. Every analyst covering the Beijing meeting acknowledged that Tehran's goal was to secure continued economic and diplomatic support, and to reaffirm ties before Trump's arrival. Iran told China what it needs before America got to ask China to stop providing it. Now, what the ceasefire's one-month anniversary actually tells you about where this goes. Because a managed confrontation cannot stay managed forever. It resolves in one of three directions. The first direction is a deal. The United States reportedly sent Iran a 14-point proposal this week. It includes a halt to uranium enrichment for at least 12 years, a handover of Iran's enriched uranium stockpile, a lifting of American sanctions, a release of frozen Iranian assets, and an agreement by both sides to reopen the Strait of Hormuz within 30 days of signing. Iran is described as reviewing this proposal. Rubio said this morning that he hopes to receive a serious offer from Iran later today. If Iran sends a substantive response and the gap between the proposals is bridgeable, a deal is possible before the May 14th summit. The diplomatic pressure from Pakistan, from the economic strain inside Iran, from China quietly urging resolution before Trump arrives in Beijing, all of that points toward a narrow window where a deal could happen. The second direction is formal collapse. Iran's Revolutionary Guard attacked 3 American destroyers last night. American jets struck military facilities in response. Trump said one big glow coming out of Iran if the ceasefire breaks. America has used more than a third of its Tomahawk cruise missiles and half of its THAAD and Patriot interceptors in 70 days of conflict. If the deal window closes and the Guard continues escalating, the ceasefire word becomes impossible to maintain and bombing resumes. The Pentagon told Congress in a classified briefing that clearing Hormuz of Iranian mines after any deal would take up to 6 months. That figure tells you the Pentagon is not planning for a quick resolution, even in the optimistic scenario. The third direction is the one China appears to be positioning for, regardless of which of the first two occurs: an indefinite extension of the current managed confrontation. Iran keeps firing at ships it chooses. America keeps disabling tankers and striking IRGC facilities. Both sides keep calling it a ceasefire. Oil stays above $100. China's 1.2 billion barrel strategic reserve, built from discounted Iranian and Russian crude, keeps appreciating in value at elevated prices. China's dark fleet keeps moving Iranian oil to Chinese refineries. China positions itself as the indispensable mediator by continuing to talk to both sides without forcing a resolution that would end the profitable ambiguity. The May 14th summit produces a trade framework and a joint statement about regional stability. The word Iran appears in the communiqué. The specific mechanism to stop Chinese oil purchases does not. China's double readout strategy works best in the third direction. As long as the managed confrontation continues, China earns diplomatic credit from every call it makes and every meeting it hosts, while collecting the economic benefit of discounted Iranian crude and elevated global oil prices simultaneously. Watch 3 things in the next 72 hours as the ceasefire's 1-month mark passes. The first is whether Iran sends a formal response to the American 14-point proposal before the May 14th summit. Rubio said this morning he is waiting for a serious offer. If Iran responds with a counter that closes the distance on the uranium question and on Hormuz, the deal window opens. If Iran sends back language that restates its existing public positions without movement, the managed confrontation continues, and the question becomes how long America absorbs it before the third carrier group changes the calculation. The second is whether China makes any statement specifically about the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, the new Iranian agency that is currently emailing toll payment forms to shipping companies. China called for Hormuz to reopen as soon as possible in Wang Yi's statement. The Persian Gulf Strait Authority is the formal institutional structure Iran built to ensure Hormuz never reopens on any terms except Iranian sovereign authority. China has not named that agency in any official statement. If China names the Persian Gulf Strait Authority by name and says it is unacceptable under international law, China is genuinely using its influence. If China keeps calling for reopening Hormuz without naming the agency Iran just created to permanently control it, China is performing pressure rather than applying it. The third is what the May 14th Beijing summit communiqué says about Iran. Every analyst focused on the trade framework and the technology restrictions and the Taiwan conversation. But the Iran sentence, or its absence in the joint summit document, is the most important signal the summit will produce. If Trump sits across from Xi for 2 days and the final communiqué contains no specific commitment from China about Iranian oil purchases, no mechanism to address Chinese weapons transfers, no named accountability for any of the support architecture that has kept Iran economically functional through 70 days of war, then the ceasefire's second month will look exactly like the first. Both sides will keep firing. Both sides will keep saying it is holding. Oil will stay at $100. And China will keep scheduling meetings with both sides and publishing statements that each side reads as support for its own position. 1 month ago, Pakistan's prime minister used the word remarkable. The ceasefire is 1 month old today. The Strait of Hormuz is controlled by an agency Iran created 3 days ago. Dubai residents heard intercept explosions above their city this morning. Trump called it a love tap. The managed confrontation continues. And China has not said either thing.